Congressman Jim Jordan has recently been overseeing some hearings where they are subpoenaing Facebook on communications they had with the White House that pertain to censoring Americans online. Let's roll this clip.
Because the White House was demanding it and they wanted to keep their cozy relationship with the Biden administration, they censored First Amendment speech. That's what this clearly shows. And frankly, we got more documents that we're reviewing that I think are going to show it even more so.
So, according to the Wall Street Journal, internal Meta emails say pressure from Washington was behind a decision to take down posts attributing the pandemic to a man-made virus. Facebook complied with the request and removed content by users, aka censored the free speech of the American public. Facebook complied with the request and removed content by users, aka censored the free speech of the American public, that presented evidence of a lab leak theory. Nick Clegg, who is Facebook's president of global affairs, wrote in a July 2021 email, "Can someone quickly remind me why we are removing rather than demoting or labeling claims that COVID is man-made?" He was responded to by Facebook's vice president of content policy, who said, "We were under pressure from the administration and others to do more. We shouldn't have done it." The emails...
Wow.
Yeah. The emails were obtained by the House Judiciary Committee, which is subpoenaing Facebook as part of a larger investigation into the government censorship campaign against social media companies and users. They were written 3 months after Facebook ceased its censorship policy over the lab leak theory. And the lab leak wasn't the only thing that the White House was trying to get censored on Facebook. Other communication shows senior Biden advisor Andy Slavitt melting down over the company's failure to remove a humorous meme that portrayed COVID vaccine participants joining a class action lawsuit. And Brad, I actually was able to find this meme. Can you describe it for us?
Yeah, so this is like a pretty typical like Facebook boomer meme, I'd call it. So it's got Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the television screen, and the subtext says, 10 years from now, you'll be watching TV and hear ... Did you or a loved one take the COVID vaccine? You may be entitled to blah, 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 blah. Obviously, that riff of like, you know, those ads that come on like certain channels that are trying to get you to join a class action lawsuit about, did you take Cymbalta, blah, 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 or like that kind of thing. I mean, I find it hilarious that this was actually something that the White House was paying attention to and using our tax dollars and their time to try to get removed. It's literally a meme. It's not even asserting. It'd be one thing, right, if this was like some manifesto of false information about vaccines or something. It was literally a meme.
It was literally a meme. And according to these emails, Andy Slavitt was outraged that Facebook did not immediately comply. And in fact, to their credit, Nick Clegg did seem to at least make an attempt to stand up for the Constitution against the White House. He wrote, "Removing content like that would represent a significant injuries of free expression in the U.S." But Slavitt was unperturbed. He did not care. He replied that such communications would, quote, inhibit confidence in COVID vaccines amongst those the Biden administration is trying to reach. My blood was boiling when I came across this, Brad. It's one of those things where we did know it was happening, right? We have the Twitter files. We obviously knew that they were doing this to Twitter. They were doing it to probably every other social media company out there. But reading these kinds of things in print, I mean, what is your just gut reaction to that?
Alarm that the White House thinks it's appropriate for them to be lobbying private companies to take down the speech of American citizens and pressuring them. Not you know, we've heard some people say like, oh, these are just polite requests. Clearly, it's a pressure campaign. Clearly, when a senior advisor to the president of the United States is expressing outrage at you as a company, you're going to feel tremendous pressure because they're wielding, you know, a massive axe looming over your head of they can regulate, tax, punish you, all these things, and you're trying to stay on good terms with the most powerful man in the world. And I think that it is incredibly coercive. I think it's a huge First Amendment problem. I think it's also pointless and stupid. I think it's probably the tip of the iceberg. There's probably so much more of this because even like from the White House podium, then Press Secretary Jen Psaki was admitting at the time they were contacting Facebook, lobbying them to get posts down. Now we have the leaked emails and we know how bad it was. But there's no business in government doing this, perhaps with like the most narrow exceptions for national security about like sending, you know, flagging terrorist recruitment propaganda or something. And so that's why I support the legislation that would make it illegal for federal bureaucrats to do this kind of big tech censorship collusion, with only narrow exceptions for, criminal activity and terrorism recruitment material and that kind of stuff, because this is just totally beyond the pale of what it is appropriate for the White House to be doing.
Well, and so here's a problem with that, though. We did get a recent injunction by a judge basically trying to implement what you just said, right? That it is illegal for bureaucrats or politicians to contact social media companies in this way, to pressure them to remove information, unless it pertains to national security or things of that nature. But the problem with that is that people like Biden and people in his administration, they claim everything is national security or public health, right? Like this meme in of itself, they would say was a threat, as he did, to public health and trying to inspire the confidence that they needed. I mean, newsflash, you don't inspire confidence in people when you are banning their memes, criticizing things like vaccines or your mandates on them.
No, it fuels the conspiracies. It fuels
But this is
them.
around the time that Biden was trying to implement a disinformation board. You saw him pushing this idea that disinformation was dangerous or even could be deadly. And so this kind of censorship is what they are gunning for even more of. And my problem with Jim Jordan and many other Republicans is that even in the clip we rolled of him, you can hear who they predominantly tend to blame for the situation is still the social media company. They're criticizing Facebook more than they are Andy Slavitt or other people within the White House. And it's when you think about the pressures of a company in general and a White House person, a senior advisor, contacting you and saying, we want you to do this. Yes, you do care about that, not because you're some kind of simp, but because if you don't comply, well, then they can come in and use antitrust against you. Maybe they come in and change Section 230 laws, which drastically reduce your ability to moderate content on your platforms. They have all these ways of hurting you behind the scenes, and both Republicans and Democrats have been teaming up to expand those kinds of powers behind the scene, to give more power to the FTC, to reform Section 230 so that Congress has more ability to control what goes on and off social media. It makes no sense to me. You see a very real problem of the government censoring Americans via third party and pressuring private companies to do this. And instead of going after the government so stringently and trying to implement repercussions on these actors, they instead are oftentimes pushing ideas that would put more control over private companies, specifically the tech sector, in the government hands. And I think that it's completely backwards. We should be concerned about that because the actual threat to public health, the actual disinformation campaign was going against the American people. They were trying to cover up the presence of our tax dollars in that lab. There is a very real reason why the lab leak theory was so disdained. It was so shouted down. It was marginalized, called a conspiracy theory, even though we had the documents, thanks to White Coat Waste Project, where I'm a fellow who had obtained these documents long before COVID even was an outbreak, that proved that we were funding these things in that lab. The reason they wanted to hide that is because it was going to trace back to Fauci and the NIH doing illegal things. It was illegal to fund gain-of-function research during the time they were doing it for very good reason. It's risky. It tortures animals. And they were trying to cover that up. I think that to this day, it matters tremendously if our tax dollars were used to create the creation of COVID, but then perhaps the subsequent leak of a global pandemic that killed millions of people, that wrecked the global economy. This is the actual threat, the government's actions. And when they try to implement disinformation campaigns or censor, it is almost always to cover up their own tracks. It's not actually to protect you or make sure you have true information or that you have everything you need at your disposal to make the best decisions for your life. So that is the danger in giving the government any power in this regard. And I just do still think that despite us getting this kind of information, you see both Republicans and Democrats continuing to get played and going the opposite direction. I do think Rand Paul's introduced a bill that I like that actually would do a bit more of what you said, which would be to actually attach real penalties to bureaucrats and politicians who attempt to censor Americans in this way. But I believe that it's civil penalties, if I'm not mistaken. I would actually like to see it go a step further. I think it should be a criminal charge if you violate the fundamental rights of Americans as a politician or a bureaucrat, if you use your position of power to subvert the Constitution. I don't think that's a nothing burger. I think that should be taken seriously. I think that's one of the failures of our founders. They did not put enough actual recourses in our Constitution to deal with people like this. But to me, you're a traitor to the Constitution.
So I guess I think that civil penalties would be sufficient. Losing your job, I think you should be able to be sued, get rid of qualified immunity for personal damages. But I think criminal law should be reserved for like Andy Slavitt trying to get this meme taken down shouldn't land him in prison, in my opinion.
I'm not somebody who's very prison happy, but to me, using your position of power to undermine the fundamental rights of Americans, I don't think that stops until there are serious criminal penalties for that. And I think we're probably, in all honesty, a long way away from any of it, right? From any penalties whatsoever, because you do have qualified immunity and because Congress is going to be hesitant to pass legislation that actually holds people accountable because a significant number of people in Congress don't want to be held accountable. But I think if I were the founding fathers and I could rewrite the Constitution, that would be something I would add in. And I think that would actually do a lot to claw back just the gross expansion of government power we've seen over the past 200 years.